Hey everyone, it's Matt Donaghue with Mission Financial Planners, and welcome to the latest webinar we're doing on business protection planning issues. Today we're going to focus on really three legs of a stool. The first leg is what happens if a key employee should pass away, what happens if the key employee or the owner becomes disabled. What does that mean to the business? And we're also going to talk about some of the other risks to the business as well. And that's where we have a special guest with us today, Pablo Gonzalez, who's the CEO of Fidelis Insurance Brokers. Pablo is a very experienced insurance broker focusing primarily in the risk management property casualty space. So he's going to have a lot of valuable insight he brings to the conversation today. For those of you watching on YouTube, as always, feel free to reach out to us. You can always get a hold of me, Ken, or Jason at 888-339-0093. You can always send an email to admin@mfplanners.com. And if you have questions for Pablo specifically, feel free to reach out to him as well, 210-570-2111 or contact@fidelisinsurance.com. Welcome to June. It's hard to believe that the year is almost half over. When we're thinking about businesses, some of the smaller businesses, medium-sized or even large businesses out there, guys, from your perspectives, what are some of the issues you see when it comes to that sort of key employee circle, that ownership circle?
I would say some of the issues with the key employee space, Matt, is currently it's people stealing your key employee. So your competitor down the street says, "Hey, I'll pay you more than that one. Come over here with me," and you're losing your key employee to just wage wage-based change or benefits or any of those other things that come into play. The second thing is sometimes key employees get sick or they get injured or stuff happens where they can no longer do the things that they were doing for you as a key employee, and it does impact the business.
Jason, from your standpoint, it's losing people, and also what happens if they get sick, injured, or God forbid, pass away unexpectedly. Ken, what are some of the issues?
The thing I'd add on top of what Jason was going to say is they might step out and become a competitor of yours. They've learned to master your craft or the craft, and maybe the entry to opening up their own shop is low enough. And so making sure the golden handcuffs are there so that, again, everybody wins and you're not now having a competitor.
All right, turning it over to Pablo for a second here. So while Ken and Jason and me at Mission Financial Planners are a little more concerned about the death and disability side of things and maybe just employee retention, Pablo, what are some of the issues you've seen with the businesses you work with?
For a key employee, you might see a partner or an associate maybe mishandle the employee benefits package. They can also be caught up in maybe harassment. So you might want to have some EPLI coverage. So employment practices may fire somebody based on discrimination, or we always hear about sexual harassment in the workplace, things like that. So you definitely don't want one of your higher ups or anybody really in the company involved in anything like that, but especially your management circle. So want to make sure everybody keeps their nose clean, and also that you have the coverage for it in case something like that were to happen.
It echoes back to something Jason said, which is people are human. You might think they're going to do X and suddenly they're doing Y, and the
Mhm.
business owner is usually the last person to find out. That's what I've seen over the years.
And there's a lot of misinterpretations. You might say something to an employee in passing or something like that that you may not even think about that is offensive to anybody, but it could be taken wrong, and then next thing you know, you have an HR nightmare, and you get a phone call from your HR department saying, "Hey, we got this issue with somebody here in the office," and it can go on and on. Definitely want to make sure you have that coverage as well as part of your liability package.
Understood. So, a whole host of issues here. Pablo, I'll start with you on this one. When you're looking at this list of questions, which one pops out at you as something that you think people should be thinking about as a business owner and ideally taking some action on too?
The one that jumps out to me is the last one. If you're sick or hurt and unable to work, how will business overhead expenses continue to be paid during your recovery? I think of workers' comp. There may be some other coverages there that would help for a key employee, but workers' comp would help that key employee get back to work faster, get some rehab, things like that, get them back to work, cover their salary for a period of time until they're able to return back to work. So make sure you want to get those key employees back in the office so that the business can keep running smoothly.
from your standpoint, then, when you're having conversations with business owners about workers' comp and stuff like that, are there additional coverages or supplementary coverages that you end up talking about with them that they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, in this space, there's not much more than we can really do than workers' comp, was just basically getting that employee back. On the benefit side and everything else, that's where you guys come in. But that's just a risk that we run into every day. So one of those key employees being out and then your business not being able to function properly, it's just there's not much more there as far as a product wise that we can do.
Jason and Ken, a lot of times the reality is there's a budget at the business and they want to insure against everyone and they want to absolutely take care of their best people and they're going to get to it tomorrow. When you guys are looking at this list, what do you see? But what's the thing that maybe they should look at doing now?
Some people argue, can I afford to have some of these protections? Can you afford not to have some of these protections? Your business is your most valuable asset. And we have insurance and protections on our phone, on our car, on our house. And yet your most important asset that can generate generational wealth, it's worth digging into, finding a way to make it work. That'll be my nugget. Jason?
Yeah, I'd say the overhead thing that Pablo's talking about is that's even if you're injured and you as a business owner can not have to have the income from the business, you still have the cost of the business. And if you don't condition yourself against that cost for recovery time, then it's coming out of your personal situation and that could destroy a business owner from that end. So the business overhead protections that exist in the disability space, because that's usually where we see these things happening, is a disability or an injury, and it could be no cause of your own. Just somebody runs into you with their vehicle. Great, yeah, you're going to sue them and recover damages. How long will that take?
That brings up a great question. You're driving the company vehicle, right? Now you've got not just the disability issue, but then Pablo, how often are business owners actually reviewing coverages for vehicles and stuff like that?
Right. Where there's companies that are, let's say, delivery heavy, they look at that quite often. But there's a lot of businesses that have auto exposure that don't have coverage. For instance, like I'm sure you guys go to the bank, maybe pick up some office supplies, things that you need, maybe to and from meeting a client for lunch or dinner or breakfast or a cup of coffee. So when you're in the course of employment and you're using your personal vehicle, but for company business, you need to have that auto coverage for the company. You hit somebody and injure them or maybe even kill them in an auto accident on the way to the bank, to drop off a deposit or something. Maybe you look down, your cell phone falls down and you go to pick it up and all of a sudden you're in this big accident. The lawyers are going to start asking questions. And so they're going to go after who's got the deeper pockets. Are we going to go after your personal auto policy? And then your personal insurance company is going to say, you know what, if you were in the course of employment, if you were doing this as part of your job, then this is going to fall into commercial auto. So we're going to deny this claim. And if the company doesn't have commercial auto, then, we know what happens. They're going to put a big fat lawsuit on you. But if you have that commercial auto coverage, hired non-owned auto where employees are using their vehicles to run company errands, and it's not very expensive. You can typically tack that on as part of your general liability policies. Yeah, definitely something to consider. And you'd be surprised that there's not majority of what I see of most business owners that aren't like delivery heavy, where they're like, let's say, like delivering pizzas or like catering or visiting clients at their offices and dropping off products and materials and things like that. They just don't think about it. But if you run errands for your business, if you have employees using their cars to run errands, the coverage you need to have.
That was super illuminating to me. Ken's nodding along, and I think you just scared Jason stiff. But that's good to know. If you're a business owner listening to this, is something you should be talking about or working with your agent on. And if you don't have an agent, you should talk to Pablo and see what he can do for you. So business protection planning, you look at this slide, and the focus of this slide, of course, is retaining the talent. Jason and Ken, take a minute, talk about the insurance, the life insurance disability side of this. And then Pablo, I'd like you to take a few minutes and talk about the risk management side of protecting the business from the key employee, because life happens. People do things that you don't expect. Ken and Jason, where do you start?
I'm going to start with the middle one. A lot of business owners have to sign personal guarantees at times to run their business. The three of us had to do it at some point when we were getting our office space or furniture or whatever it is. those are individuals, those are entities that 100% would have a claim to part of our estate and get those paid off. So what are some of the what are some of the areas of exposure you might have or might need to be settled upon if you were to pass away prematurely?
I would say source of funds to pay business overhead expenses and a short recovery time that you couldn't make. The fire sales is real in businesses, just like it is in real estate. And that if you need your cash flow in a crunch and you need to get an asset sold to make the difference between losing your house or not, guess what? Your business is going at a discount. You're not getting a dollar for a dollar. You're getting 50 cents or 20 cents on that dollar for them to come and rescue out of a bad position. And that part is hugely important to know where your business is and what your cash flow reserve pool is to make sure that you don't get objectified in that way because of just the nature of not having hit a bad spot.
The one thing I'd add on with Ken and Jason's comments quick before getting Pablo's thoughts is a lot of business owners look at the DI and the life insurance only aspect of this. You also got to think about the long-term care aspect of this. We have a lot of business owners who are 60 and older and don't have any of that kind of protection in place. And tell you what, that artery popping, that accident that now requires that you need some help getting out of bed every day, that kind of stuff, that'll destroy the value of your business overnight if you end up in a scenario like that. I know we're not really talking about long-term care today, but long-term care should be at least a consideration for the business owner. So Pablo, you've got the managing the risk of what happens to the key employee. How do we manage the risks that the key employees bring to the table?
We had one client that had a really nice Ferrari and bought it in the name of the business and still insisted on insuring it on his personal auto policy because we all know commercial auto policies are very expensive. And most commercial auto policies aren't going to cover like a Ferrari. So the problem with that too is that, and lawyers are really good at piercing that corporate veil, that protection, is you got to look at the hobbies and the things that the business owners and the management team like to do and make sure that all their personal lines insurance is written the way it's supposed to, because some of that can spill over onto the business. Say during work hours, this guy takes out his Ferrari and goes for a joyride with one of his clients and they get in a wreck or something like that. Again, it goes back to the commercial auto policy, but want to make sure that his personal affairs are also covered. You want to have those high limits of auto liability. You want to have an umbrella. You want to have high limits on your liability on your home. Do you have really risky hobbies? Do you like to go gliding? Do you like to go jump out of planes, heli skiing, things like that? All those things can spill over to the business. And like I said, these attorneys, I've talked to a lot of lawyers. I went to St. Mary's, and a lot of these guys tell me it's piercing that corporate veil is getting a little bit easier in today's legal climate. So just want to make sure that's all covered as well on the personal side.
Piercing that corporate veil, he's talking about the intermingling of the business and the personal. If you don't put asset protection as part of your financial planning as a person, then you're just swinging out there in the wind, waiting for something to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's more of when it will happen.
Anytime that's intermingled, we have another client that have their office building on their personal property with their home in the back. And it's really hard to get that pieced out and insured correctly. And they don't even have insurance on the building for their business. And then they have foot traffic and things like that. And we've tried to work with this client as far as getting them set up properly. But the other thing is budget. But these are all considerations that you have to take into account when you're first starting. It's really hard to, what are you going to tell this guy? Okay, we'll sell your house and your property or get rid of the building on your property. And that's going to be even more expensive for this guy to go find a building somewhere. Getting it insured properly can be very costly if you don't start your financial plan and then your insurance and then build everything out correctly. I'm sure Jason has had to undo a lot of messes for people that did things incorrectly. So starting out, is definitely the way to go. It might be a little bit more costly in the beginning, but on the back end, it can get even more costly.
You guys both made a really interesting point. One is you've got to insure against more than one risk, right? It isn't just somebody dies, it's what happens from a behavioral standpoint as well. Pablo, to your point, the guy's got a car, Ferrari or not, owned by the company, he takes it out for a joyride, gets in an accident or hurts somebody, the business might be done. at that moment because they didn't have the right coverages in place. From
Mhm.
Jason's standpoint, he's looking at it as well, saying, okay, wait a second, when you set this thing up, you intermingled everything, which we see a lot of business owners do. It goes back to corporate veil. You didn't even have a corporate bank account. It just went to your personal account. And that's where all the assets are. So you're never going to be able to prove to anybody that it's not you, not in a million years. So when we get into that, then we all want to think that we're not the person that's going to do something, or we're not the person that's going to have something happen to us. So key employee indemnification, what we're getting into here is how much insurance should be on the key employee, whether it's from a disability or from a life insurance standpoint, but also what kind of additional coverages does the business need to protect the business from the key employee. And I know it sounds weird saying it that way, but it's that human behavior element that you can't always account for. Ken and Jason and I experienced it last year. We had a trusted employee who'd been with us, what, Ken, 5 years, 6 years, something like that, and was a key part of our business. He left and gave us 10 days notice before he was leaving. We're a small business. We need all hands on deck all the time. He did a huge headache for us. And that's just someone leaving and doing it legally. I can't imagine somebody has a sexual harassment claim and you have to force them out and then still pay for it afterwards. So it's a long introduction, but the same concept, guys. Go ahead, tear this apart. What are the issues you guys are dealing with when you're talking with employers about their key employees and what might happen to them, things they might do, stuff like that?
So I do have a real life example, and I'd love for Pablo to just tear it apart a little bit. There's a person that we know that had a business on a good piece of property that was very valuable, and they had a manager that was managing this business for them, a very key employee. They could not be there, not do anything, show up once a month, get the books and records, and move on. And what they ended up finding after about 2 to 4 years of this happening is the employee was actually embezzling money from the business by sending it to a third party alleged vendor that was collecting money and then spending frivolously on other things that were not part of the business expense. As they came to discover this, they had to deal with the issue of what happens next. Are there any protections for that business owner that you know of, Pablo, in the space of managing that risk?
Yeah, another company that I used to work for, one of the key employees was basically embezzling money. There is coverage for that. That can always be added by endorsement on general liability policies. There is a separate policy. You can even add it to employment practices liability as well. It would cover the employer for instances like that, where cash or securities, things were stolen, misappropriated. Maybe somebody was completing a wire transfer and sent it to the wrong account number, and now they can't get that money back. That is available with most like business owners policies. There are sublimits. So for some of these larger companies, they're going to have access to larger limits, but you just have to check with your broker to see what kind of sublimit you have for those incidents. That's a really key consideration to think about.
Ken and Jason, give me a scenario. Business owner or key employee died and the business went off the rails. Talk to me about that.
There's a good chance that there's intellectual property that's lost with that key employee as well. Just there were things that they were doing. And so while it's not listed on the screen, protecting yourself by having defined processes of what all of your staff is doing so that they can be replaced. That's not a policy or anything else we're talking about, but that is a form of insurance to make sure that if and when somebody needs to step in that role, it's as seamless as possible.
That'll also drive the valuation of your business because you can show a potential buyer, here's the system. Okay, so questions you got to ask about your business. There's a bunch on here. Ken, I think you hit on the middle one. Do you have employees with special or unique talents? But when you're thinking about all these questions, guys, and Ken, you bring up a good point. Nobody likes to micromanage, but a lot of business owners are people too. When we're thinking about the supervision and management of the business, and Pablo, you brought up a great point. Do you tend to see these issues come up more in businesses that are the owners a step removed from everything?
Yeah, Matt, I think it's 100% on the businesses. I've seen it time and time again on businesses that where the owner gets established, they work hard to get the business going, and then they just hands off a little bit and they start relaxing. There's a saying in Spanish, but it translates basically to there's nothing like the steps of an owner through a business. Nothing is more sanitizing to a business than the owner consistently being there. Like what happened at that company that I was with is the business owner was away on golf and taking trips to Europe with his family and things like that. And that's when all this embezzlement happened. That's when all those crimes occurred. So that does fall under the crime coverage for the business, but it has a sublimit. But yeah, absolutely. I see it time and time from businesses where the owner or the management team has been relaxed. And if you see them out there on the golf course, man, there's nothing. It's like the when the cat's away, the mice will play kind of deal, right?
That lays a lot into, especially with a small business owner, because they don't really necessarily know all of this or what to do, is the business coaching process. Having a good business coach on your side to help navigate you through that landmine, if you would, or field of landmines, can be important when you get to a certain scale to say, hey, okay, let's figure out how we navigate this in the best way relative to what your business is about and what talents exist within that business and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 100% spot on, Jason. I see it, and I see a lot with doctors. My
That's what I was just going to bring up.
My brother's a physician and he's really good. The good thing was like he had a wife that was extremely hands-on and he has a wife that's extremely hands-on and she's got a very good business sense. But like in medical school, I think they now just started implementing some business courses in like in medical school. And because if you're going to start a practice, then you have to know some of these ins and outs. Because if you're making all this money and then you don't have the right coverages and things in place, then you can lose everything.
That ties into debt, business loan repayments, right? Because Pablo, you've got this crystallizing experience or sanitizing experience of starting the business, getting it to the point where it hits critical mass, having to actually generate revenue. Now you're living the lifestyle you want, but then there's also those businesses where it doesn't quite get there and there's still debt out there and you're a year or two away from hitting that point and then something happens.
Mm-hmm.
So from a business loan repayment standpoint, Pablo, I'm sure you've seen it. Jason, I know you've seen it where something happens while the business is still in that growth mode and suddenly the wheels fall off. Can you guys talk a little bit about that, how the right coverages can help you get through that?
Most banks nowadays don't do loans on a personal guarantee. So regardless of your business, you're a small business owner, they want a personal guarantee from you. That loan's going to get paid and your assets and other things are subject to getting repossessed if you can't. There's a huge risk there for you, let alone the commercial loan impact on the stuff that Pablo would cover to make sure that if stuff does happen that you can't control, it can be cared for. Like Pablo once had a home builder that I was working with. And sometimes these home builder sites, they leave stuff at the site because they're coming back the next day to do stuff. They'll have bricks, they'll have sheetrock, they'll have a bunch of stuff at the site. And one day he came back to the site and his stuff was not there.
So it happens when theft occurs. From your expertise, Pablo, what should people do from an insurance standpoint?
Theft, like embezzlement, like the way we were talking, or like building materials. Yeah, builders risk policies they have for a builder. Of course, you have to have all the right security protocols in place. You have to have fencing around the property. It's good to have the security cameras and things like that. I think they have one it looks like almost looks like an alien type of looking box. Like it's this box with a big old pole on it, security cameras. It's got GPS and motion detectors and things like that. So you have to invest in your security in order for the insurance company in good faith to cover you. And then you got to make sure that builder has appropriate coverage for building materials on site. We had incidences where some buildings were vacant or just about to be completed where somebody came in and stole all the copper from the business, all the copper lines, copper wiring, the AC units, things like that. Those are just things that business home builders and considerations that they have to take into account when they're building these homes. And there's so much theft in the construction business that a lot of companies have just been excluding things left and right because they're just like, man, this is out of control. We can't even do anything about it. These guys just find ways to get in and steal. One other thing I wanted to mention, maybe we have a little bit more time to talk, but kidnap and ransom insurance also, especially for a key employee or an owner. You see these high value multi-million-dollar businesses, and you have a business owner that say goes on this trip to I don't know, the Middle East or something like that, or goes to Mexico and they get kidnapped and they hold the business ransom too. So that's another thing to consider.
So that makes me think of ransomware attacks. So what about cyber risk? How do you
Yeah,
guys
cyber
help people with
coverage,
that?
holding the business hostage, especially if you're data heavy, if your production of your business relies on your data. Let's say like an architectural firm, I'll give my brother's office as an example, and he had a ransomware attack. He had a cyber attack where they basically held his hard drives hostage. All his plans are on there. All his architectural plans are digital.
Mm.
And so what do you do there? And I don't know the outcome. Finally, he was able to get all his stuff back. He had some computer whiz come in and was able to recover all his data. But of course, he didn't pay the ransom. But if you're like a multi-million dollar company and some guy holds all your stuff hostage for, let's say, $1 million, and what do you do? And if you don't have this coverage available to you, then it really puts you in a predicament. And these companies also, like these insurance companies that do have the cyber protection coverage, they guide you through it. It's almost like a kidnap and ransom deal. It's almost like a negotiator. They help you go through the whole process. Okay, this is the email they sent you. This is what you want to answer. And this is how to handle the situation as we're going through this. But I see a lot of business owners that do not have cyber coverage.
It sounds to me like if you're a business owner, you definitely want cyber.
Absolutely. Like even hey, we got the passwords for your bank account, line information, social security numbers, medical data.
And you also want to protect yourself, especially if you're a business that does bounce back and forth across a border. I'm sure, Pablo, just like you talked about with theft insurance, you've got to show that you took reasonable precaution to mitigate the threat risk.
Yeah, that's all part of the underwriting process. For cyber, they want to see that you actually have firewalls, you have virus protection, you're taking precautions to protect your personal data and your clients' data and things like that. They're not going to just write anybody. And a lot of these companies, what they'll do is they'll even put a cyber plan together for you. They'll look at your website, they'll look at your servers and things like that, and they'll give you a grade and tell you on firewall protection and client data, you're a C, and this is how you can improve. And they actually help you walk through those steps to improve that, maybe with your IT department. All that's done in underwriting. And for kidnap and ransom, you sit down with your management team and your owners and say, okay, where do you guys like to travel? Where do you guys go? If you go to South Africa or something like that, or the Middle East, or one of those really high risk places, you're going to be assigned a different premium for your policy. But like the kidnap and ransom, they give you maps and they give you in the portal where you put in where you're traveling, and it gives you all the recommendations of what to do when you travel to that country, who to call if you get stuck, or all those key considerations when traveling to keep you safe, you and your family safe.
That's certainly eye-opening. That's stuff I hadn't, like, you hear about it, but you don't really think about what are the practical aspects of.
I used to work in an office where we had our own kidnap and ransom product that the owner built. He had it reinsured through some captives in the British Virgin Islands. We had maybe 2 or 3 claims in the time that I was there, and they were all handled successfully. The person was returned to their family unharmed, and the ransom was paid. And I think half those cases they did capture the assailant. The insurance company wants to be indemnified. They want to get their money back too.
Everyone, we're at time. I'm going to do a round robin here. Ken, what's the one takeaway you would encourage people to get out of today's session?
Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about your business. Let's figure out where the opportunities are, but also where the risks are. And it's just when you have multiple minds around the table that have different perspectives, their own stories, their own things, we're able to uncover this. Doing it by yourself, it's hard, if not impossible. Let's chat.
All right, Jason.
I'm going to say integration. You've built this business. Don't miss out on the fact that the business is connected to your personal, because it fuels the personal. You need integrated planning to make sure that all things are covered. The last thing you want is a grenade thrown into your personal life and blow up your entire situation.
Pablo?
Do a complete study of your management team and your ownership. Who owns what kind of cars everybody's driving, who likes to travel, where, and what kind of hobbies do you enjoy, how your personal line stuff is set up so it doesn't spill over into the business. You don't want to be a business owner running around with minimum limits of liability on your personal insurance, because that can potentially put the company in jeopardy. Let's look at that top to bottom, open every single crevice and look where there's any gaps in coverage and where we can cover that risk. It doesn't make sense to work hard all your life and lose your business for something that could have been covered with 100 $200 a month policy.
Taking all three of your comments together, I would say have a conversation about a coordinated plan that recognizes you as an individual, you as a business, especially if you're a small business. And then the third thing is you can take a risk off the table. If you can manage a risk for literally pennies compared to what it would cost you if it comes to pass, why wouldn't you? The worst case scenario is maybe you spent a little more on insurance than what you planned. Thank you again so much, everyone, for being with us today. Again, for those of you watching us on YouTube, feel free to reach out to Pablo at Fidelis Insurance Brokers. He's the CEO. You can reach him at 270-570-2111. Jason, Ken, and I, we do sessions like this almost weekly. Next week, we have estate planning at noon Central Time we're going to be talking about. We're also doing a Social Security workshop next Wednesday night. And then the following week, we're going to talk about annuities. Pablo, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for fitting us into your schedule. Ken and Jason, thanks as always for your expertise. And everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Take care.